Hello, I'm Vanja Gröger, also known as Nechtan, and in this drum-focused review I will talk about the album Alien from Strapping Young Lad. Enjoy! Strapping Young Lad were a pretty legendary band, and they also had a legendary drummer, Gene Hoglan. I think you all know him. It is a great shame, but sadly the band was disbanded in 2007. This album was their second last album. In my opinion, Strapping Young Lad perfected their industrial metal sound with this album, and it is very unique and very special. But before we continue talking about the music, let's first talk about how the album looks like. The first thing that I notice is that the band name itself is actually not on the cover, but it is a sticker on the jewel case. Talking about the cover, I really like the red letters that say Alien, because they look kind of like a mixture of ancient Egypt and modern Japanese letters or something like that. On the inside of the booklet, you can see mainly the lyrics and photos of the band members. You can see here Jet Simon looking very professional, Byron Stroud looking like kind of a typical metal bass player, and Gene Hoglan looking very nice. And then you have, of course, Mr. Devin Townsend here. Also, let's not forget the hilarious group picture on the last page of the booklet. I think it's very funny how all band members look kind of normal, but Devin really stands out, making this very ugly and stupid faces. The booklet also contains some information about where this album was recorded. It was recorded mainly in Vancouver in Armory Studios and Greenhouse Studios, and also in Devin Townsend's personal studio, the Dev Labs. There's also a pretty long list of guest musicians, because they used several children's voices and also a female and a male choir. Also on the last page of the booklet there is a list of personal acknowledgements from the individual band members. First of all, the list of names in the acknowledgements is pretty long. I didn't see anything special in Simon's and Byron's acknowledgements, but I think Gene's acknowledgements are the most emotional and the most personal. He starts his acknowledgements with the sentence, "Super duper thanks, these people have made me smile this past year, a year with few of them." And then he goes on and thanks his mom and dad, and also especially his bandmates, and he also writes about Devin, "Couldn't have made it this year without you, bro." This is a very stark contrast to the acknowledgements of Devin himself, because there are only 4 words. "Thanks, Tracy, family, friends." And that's it. So, let's talk about the sound on this album. First of all, the general sound is very, very big. Everything sounds huge, and this is also because oftentimes there are many sound layers. There are of course the huge sounding drums, especially the kick drum sounds just mighty. There are also the guitars, the bass, and many layers of vocals sometimes, and also all kinds of keyboards, samples and effects. And this is a kind of typical stylistic device that Devin Townsend really likes to use, and you can hear this in basically all Strapping Young Lad albums, but also on his solo albums. Regarding the drum sound on this album, the kicks are of course triggered, like in 99% of metal albums, but the rest of the kit I'm not really sure about. The snare, for example, sounds in some parts very artificial, but sometimes also very organic, so it's really hard to tell. I think it might be the acoustic snare, but with a lot of compression. What I really like about the drum sound on this album is, first of all, the very fat kick drum sound. It's really like a punch in the gut each time he plays his bass drum. And I also like the fact that you can hear everything he does on his cymbals. I think it is almost some kind of disease that in many modern metal productions you have a very fat kick drum and snare sound, but the cymbals are just too quiet. But luckily this is not the case on this album. And something that is also very unusual is the number of microphones they used for recording the drums. I watched the studio report and I think they used like almost 20 microphones just for the drum set, and I think that's really insane. But since the result sounds awesome, I think they did a good job. So let's talk about the drumming on this album. And this, I think, really stands out. First of all, some words about the recording process. They recorded the drums in a very big studio, and so they had the space that Gene was playing his drums, and he was actually jamming along to his bandmates who also played their instruments. And I think this is a really cool process because this way, as a drummer, you don't sit just alone in the room and everyone else is watching you. Gene Hoglan himself said in the studio report that he is very proud of his work on this album and that they didn't use any kind of post-editing and that he really nailed every song as you can hear it on the record. When you watch the studio report, you can also hear Gene Hoglan say some very funny and interesting things. For example, something like, "My job as a drummer is to be amazing at everything I do." Or something else he said is, "My mental preparation is to crush all the time." He also stated that he played the album like a human drum machine. As I mentioned in the beginning, this album is mostly industrial metal. And very fitting to this, the drumming is very focused on the double bass drumming. Gene Hoglan does a lot of interesting stuff with his cymbals and his snare, but I think the double bass drumming really is the highlight on this album. And as far as I can judge from my experience as a drummer, it is extremely hard to nail all these complicated patterns as good as he does, and it is absolutely amazing. In general, he doesn't use his toms too often, but when he does, he uses them usually for really sick fills. For example, you can hear one of that fills in the song Skeksis, and these fills are always a combination of several tom strokes and then double bass hits, and he's really a master at nailing this kind of fills extremely precise. The songwriting in general on this album is a weird mixture of sometimes very simple stuff and on the other hand, complete madness. I think Devin Townsend himself said something like that this album is about embracing the inner freak that we all are. Regarding these weird songs, and also regarding some things I have read about Devin, I carefully assume that he must have taken a lot of drugs to write this album. I think the same goes for the lyrics on this album. They are absolutely hilarious. Just imagine you are really drunk and just walking the streets. And you have all kinds of mad thoughts racing through your mind. If you take this confused stream of thought pieces and just write it down word by word, you have the lyrics for this album. It's also very funny when you read the lyrics because many sentences or single words are written in capital letters only, and often his exclamations have a whole bunch of question and exclamation marks at the end. He also writes down all kinds of words that would normally be considered like filler words, like oh, ah, and yeah. And yeah, it's all written down in the lyrics, so it's really funny to read them. Regarding the fact that the lyrics often sound extremely random, it is very impressive that they actually fit the songs very well and that Devin as a singer brings these lyrics across in a really convincing manner. Talking about Devin Townsend himself, I have to say that he's not only a very gifted guitar player, but also an amazing singer. He uses a wide variety of different singing techniques on this album. For example, growling, shouting, but also very clean, almost opera-like singing. He also uses something that is kind of his trademark, I think. It's a weird mixture of clean singing and shouting. So it sounds like he just is screaming his lungs out, but at the same time actually hitting a note. So just like really brutal shouting, but with a melody in it. And it sounds really intense and emotional. And I really love that aspect of his voice. So in general, this is a very unique album. Because it is industrial metal, it may sound sometimes a little bit like Fear Factory, but in general, the whole atmosphere in this album is much more dark and fucked up. Also, this album has a very weird and mad element to it that really makes it stick out from other industrial metal albums. If you like industrial metal or just extreme drumming in general and cool double bass patterns, I can really recommend listening to this album. You can find the link to the album down below in the description. So, that's it for today. What are your thoughts on this album? Leave a comment down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, you can like the video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, like my Facebook page, and follow me on Twitter. See you next time.